Have you ever set foot in a strange land, only to find that life has prepared a whole new kind of loneliness for you? Eleanor Wade arrives west with a letter promising a new marriage only to find a deserted house, a dusty cradle, and an abandoned baby. A seemingly ironic twist of fate, but one that raises a question bigger than her own fears. What must she choose between turning away or staying to protect a small life? If it were you, standing between the cold wind and such fate, what would you do? Would you have the courage to become a home for a child who does not carry your blood? This story is not just Eleanor's story. It is a journey that anyone who has ever felt lonely, lost, or asked, "Am I strong enough?" can see themselves in. Please join us in the beginning of the story. If you find it touching, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so we can meet again in the next healing stories. That afternoon, the western sky was covered with a pale yellow dust, a light Eleanor Wade had never seen in the east. The light stretched across the distant mountains, making the sharp peaks of rock suddenly softer, as if caressed by the hand of sunset. The train screeched to a slow stop at the tiny station called Red Valley, where wind, dust, and old stories always lingered as if they never wanted to leave. Eleanor stepped off the train, her leather boots making a soft squeak against the dry wooden floor. She was 38, an age when most women in the West had children as big as their hips, but Eleanor was different. She had been happy, had a warm and peaceful home, and then the war took it all away. Her husband died of a fever. Her son died one winter night of pneumonia that had no money to cure in Baltimore. By the time gray hairs began to appear at her temples, she realized her life was as silent as this deserted train station. The letter was crumpled in her hand. She had read it countless times during the nearly 1,000-mile journey from Maryland to Colorado Territory. It was from Caleb Dawson, a widower, a few years older than she, who worked in a small silver mine. He wrote to her as if they had known each other for a long time. The words were humble and quiet. No promises of wealth, no vision of a romantic life. Just one thing. He wanted companionship, someone to share a small home in Red Valley. Eleanor answered. And now she stood before a strange land, trying to believe that she had not made a mistake. The Red Valley station was narrow and old, with only a few wooden pillars supporting a wind-warped roof. A group of cowboys sat with their feet up outside a nearby saloon. An old woman was selling cornbread from a rickety wooden table, and a station master was writing something in a notebook the size of a Bible. Eleanor looked around. No one fit Caleb's description in the letter. No gray-haired man in the old brown felt hat. No one waiting, looking confused. No one looking for a woman from the east. She took a deep breath. The Red Valley air was dry but clean. It smelled of red earth, pine, the wind blowing through the valley, and there was loneliness. But the western kind of loneliness, strong, enduring, uncomplaining. Eleanor walked up to the man in the station coat. "Do you know where Caleb Dawson lives?" He looked up. "Dawson?" He frowned. "If I remember correctly, he lives a little over a mile west of here, near the edge of the pine woods. He said he would pick me up." The man shrugged. "No one is waiting. Would you like me to call someone to take you there?" Eleanor nodded slightly. An old man drove her along in a horse-drawn cart. The road was red, dusty, and the farther they got from town, the fewer houses there were. A few small farms nestled in pine clumps, smoke rising from their brick chimneys. But then the houses were gone. There was only pine forest, dry rocks, wild grass, and a vast sky that seemed to swallow everything up. "Here we are." The coachman stopped in front of a small wooden house. Caleb Dawson's house stood alone on the edge of the woods. The wood was faded in the sun. The windows were closed. There was no sound, no sign of life. Eleanor stepped down, her legs wobbling. A feeling of unease crept up in the pit of her stomach, but she still walked to the door and knocked, lightly. No one answered. "I'll wait a few minutes," said the driver, "in case someone just leaves." Eleanor nodded, pushing open the door, which was partially ajar. The house was dark. It smelled cold, like the stench of long-forgotten places, the smell of unwashed clothes, the smell of burnt-out wood, the smell of loneliness. Eleanor took another step, then another, and then she heard it, a thin, faint cry, like the cry of a little bird that had fallen from its nest, unheard. She stopped dead. Is anyone there? She called in a small, trembling voice. There was no answer. Only the short, gasping breaths of a child. Eleanor followed the crying sound to the small room behind the kitchen. In the middle of the room, under the dim light coming through the small window, there was a wooden cradle. In the cradle was a baby about a few months old. His face was red from crying. His tiny hands were waving as if looking for someone. At that moment, Eleanor felt her heart squeeze. It felt so much like the last night with her son. She knelt down beside the cradle. Oh, baby, who left you here? The baby looked at her with big round eyes, wet with tears but not afraid, as if it had been waiting for her all along. Eleanor gasped. A feeling of pain and tenderness spread through her chest. She lifted the baby. It was lighter than Eleanor had expected, as if it had not been well cared for. It can't be, she whispered. Where is Caleb? How could you leave him alone like this? No clues, no letters, no messages, just a child left behind in an abandoned house. The wind outside blew strong, hitting the wooden wall like a long sigh of the west. Eleanor looked around the empty house. She knew that wherever Caleb was, he wouldn't be back for her any time soon, and nothing mattered more to her than the baby's faint breath. The coachman stepped into the doorway, startled by the sight of the child. Good heavens, you found him here? Yes. And Caleb? No. The man shook his head slightly. Something is wrong. Eleanor hugged the baby to her chest. It buried its face in her shoulder, its cries gradually fading. A very old, very familiar feeling, as if from a previous life, arose within Eleanor. She squeezed his hand gently. We'll be fine, baby. She didn't know if she was comforting the child or herself. The wind rustled the pine needles. The mountains in the distance looked down on the house, as if witnessing something about to begin. A new chapter, an old wound about to be reopened, and perhaps a new love, quiet, slow, but strong enough to save both lost people. And Eleanor Wade had no idea. Red Valley held many secrets she had yet to imagine. The evening wind blew through the pine forest, making a murmuring sound like an ancient prayer. Eleanor stood on the porch of the cabin, the baby still in her arms, sleeping soundly after a long cry. She looked out at the dirt road leading back to town, where the red dust had not yet settled from the wheels of the departing carriage. No one said it out loud, but Eleanor sensed something was very wrong. A decent man would not disappear, leaving a child in such an empty house, especially a man who had written letters promising a home. But this West is wilder than the human heart can fully understand. When Eleanor returned to town, the coachman took her straight to Sheriff Raymond Fletcher's office. The small brick building stood right next to the chapel. Its porch hung with an old oil lamp that swayed in the wind. The afternoon light fell on the steps, creating long streaks of brown and yellow like old memories. Sheriff Fletcher sat in the rocking chair, his boots propped up on the wooden bar in front of him. He was a man in his 50s, with patchy gray hair and a face that was seasoned, but gentle in the way. Old lawmen in the West always were aware of the chaos of life, but still kind. Eleanor stepped closer, clearing her throat to signal her presence. Sheriff opened his eyes and looked up. Hello. Who are you? Eleanor Wade. I come from Maryland. I am Mr. Caleb Dawson's mail-order bride. Eleanor's voice was soft and even, but as soon as she mentioned Caleb's name, Fletcher's expression changed a hint of surprise mixed with something like embarrassment. He stood up and opened the office door. Please come in. The room smelled of old leather, papers, and cigarettes from the night before. Fletcher walked around the desk and leaned back in his chair. You said you came to see Caleb? Yes, but he wasn't home. And there was a baby left in that house. Eleanor tightened her grip on Noah's blanket. I don't understand what happened. The sheriff sighed. It wasn't a loud sigh, but it was as heavy as winter. Caleb Dawson has been missing for 3 weeks. The words fell to the room, cold as a gust of wind blowing through the crack in the door. Disappeared? Eleanor repeated. Someone saw him leaving town. Some said he left in the night. Some said he had met with trouble at the mine. We searched for days but found no clue. Sheriff looked at the baby in her arms. As for this child, I only heard vaguely that Caleb took care of him for a while, but no one knows who his parents are. No one knows why Caleb brought him back. Eleanor felt her heart sink. New questions arose. Why hadn't Caleb mentioned the baby in his letter? Why had he left the baby alone? Where had Caleb gone? Had he met with an accident, or was he running away? Fletcher continued in a monotone voice, as if every sentence he spoke was ground through many sighs. Red Valley is a nice town, but the northern mountains are not so nice. There are some groups of people who don't like to be bothered. Maybe Caleb got involved in something he shouldn't have. Eleanor sat down on the wooden chair beside the table. The blanket wrapped around Noah moved slightly with his breathing. She reached out and stroked his forehead, though her hand was shaking. Why doesn't anyone say anything about the baby? Why doesn't anyone come to see? Sheriff interrupted, gently but bluntly. Because everyone thought Caleb would come back. And also because no one would dare take on the responsibility of raising a child of unknown origin in such a remote place. Eleanor bowed her head. She understood. In the West, every day was a battle to stay safe, to keep food, to keep their little piece of land. Not everyone had the heart or the strength to take in another life. The sheriff looked at her for a long time, and then said, "Mrs. Wade, I know you've come a long way to get here. I know you're looking forward to a fresh start. But the truth is, Caleb may not be alive. And if you don't have any other family here, life will be very difficult." Eleanor looked up. Her voice was low but firm. "I've lived through war, Mr. Fletcher. I've buried both husband and son. I think I'm strong enough to stand a wind in Red Valley." The sheriff looked at her, his eyes filled with a respect he couldn't hide. "So, what about Noah?" he asked softly, as if afraid to break the silence that had fallen over the room. Eleanor looked at the baby in her arms. Its cheeks were rosy, its hair was fine, and its small lips were pursed as if it were dreaming something peaceful. "I can't leave the boy." Eleanor's voice was almost a whisper. "Not when I found him. Not when he put his hand on my shoulder as if he trusted me." Sheriff Fletcher sighed softly, shaking his head like someone who had witnessed too many tragedies in life and knew well when fate was holding someone's hand. "She is kinder than many people here, but kind people often get hurt more." "I didn't come here looking for something easy," Eleanor said. "I came looking for a place that could heal." Sheriff smiled sadly. "Red Valley doesn't heal anyone, Mrs. Wade. But sometimes, people who come here heal themselves." Eleanor walked back to Caleb's cabin. She wanted to feel the land she had just arrived on. The dirt road leading out of town was dotted with tall pine trees, their dead branches intertwined like old fingers against the pale gray sky. A few wooden houses stood sparsely on both sides of the road. No one made any noise. Westerners were quiet, partly because they were tired, partly because they were used to being alone, partly because sad stories were easier to bear when kept inside instead of spoken out loud. Eleanor walked, feeling Noah in her arms as a fragile yet very real support, as if he was the thread that tied her to life. After all the years, she thought she was just a shadow. Passing a small grocery store, a woman was sorting bags of flour and watching. "Are you new?" "Yes." "Are you holding Noah?" Strange. Everyone knew the baby's name, but no one knew his parents. Eleanor nodded. The woman chuckled. "I'm Hattie Miller. If you need milk or a blanket, come find me. The nights in Red Valley are colder than they look." Eleanor thanked him. Her heart suddenly warmed. The West was harsh, but human love always had small threads that threaded through such difficulties. As she continued walking, Hattie called after her. "Caleb's sister. She'll be here soon. Margaret Dawson, like a winter wind from Hartford. Hard-headed, but loving. When she arrives, things could be complicated." Complicated. The word lingered in Eleanor's mind. A rich sister, a child with unknown parents, a small town filled with silence and suspicion, and a missing man. This story wasn't going anywhere. And she, even though she had just arrived in Red Valley, was caught in a vortex whose bottom she couldn't see. Eleanor held Noah closer. "It's okay, baby. We'll figure it out." The wind blew through the pines again, carrying the smell of sap and earth and something that felt like promise or warning. It was hard to tell. But Eleanor knew one thing. She had not come to Red Valley by accident, and the silence of this land held secrets that she would sooner or later uncover. Late afternoon fell quickly in Red Valley. The sunlight was blocked by tall, dark green walls of pine trees, leaving the land below in hazy darkness. Eleanor carried Noah back to Caleb's cabin, her heart filled with questions she had no answers to. But at the same time, a part of her heart felt strange, as if some invisible string was gently pulling her here. The old cabin door opened, creaking like the lament of a long neglected house. Eleanor stepped inside, the smell of wood dust mixed with the chill in the darkness, making her shiver. Noah stirred slightly. She bent down and kissed his forehead. "It's okay, little one. I'll clean up a bit before it gets dark." She placed Noah in the wooden cradle she had cleaned of dust from the last time. Light filtered through the crack in the door, making it look like Noah lay in a weak patch of sunlight. She began cleaning. Her experience in Civil War field hospitals had taught her to deal with messes with the calmest of minds. But this cabin, it wasn't just messy. It was empty. An emptiness that made her heart ache in a way she couldn't understand. Unwashed dishes, a shirt draped over the back of a chair, a few pieces of paper scattered on the floor, a long empty oil can, and on the table a tin cup with a dark coffee stain on it. Eleanor touched it. "Mr. Caleb, how did you hurry to leave everything like this?" Silence answered her, a silence so thick it was almost palpable. She spent almost an hour putting things back together, dusting the old windows, packing the rags into a small box, putting a pot of water on the wood stove which had been cold for weeks and lighting it. The fire flickered brightly, reflecting off the scratches on the wooden tabletop. The light made the cabin look less lonely, more like a home than an empty shell. Eleanor turned back to the crib. Noah was stretching his legs, his little hands waving as if to grasp the firelight. "You want to be warm too, right?" She smiled. Picking up the baby, she carried Noah to the fireplace, wrapping him in another soft blanket Hattie Miller had given her that afternoon. The baby curled up, snuggled against Eleanor, breathing softly. The feeling was so warm that it made Eleanor's eyes sting. It had been years since she had held such a small creature, had not felt a child's breath on her shoulder, had not heard its sniffles, its short, peaceful breaths. The deepest wound of her life, the winter night when her son died, had seemed to have lain dormant. But now, looking into Noah's dark brown eyes, old memories rose up like a breeze through the pine trees, soft but sharp, forgotten but very real. She put her hand over her chest where her heart was constricting. "No, not now." Eleanor closed her eyes, trying to catch her breath. "I'm here to start over, not to hurt again." But the truth was her heart was opening slowly, tremblingly like a small flame trying to cling to a piece of damp wood on a stove. As darkness fell over Red Valley, the wind outside grew louder. The pine branches scraped against the cabin walls like footsteps pacing silently. Eleanor sat in a chair by the fireplace, Noah asleep on her lap. Every time the wind blew so hard that the door creaked, she would startle and look out the window. She wasn't afraid of the darkness, but she was afraid of what was in it, the feeling that something terrible might have happened to Caleb, or worse, he deliberately disappeared. The thought made Eleanor feel a lump in her throat. Did he run away? Or was he captured? Or is he dead somewhere in the woods? All possibilities hung in the balance, making the cabin, no matter how warm, not enough to dispel the chill that was spreading through Eleanor's soul. She looked at Noah. The baby was sleeping soundly, his small lips slightly parted as if he were having a sweet dream. Noah's peacefulness made Eleanor think to herself, even if Caleb runs away or gets into an accident, no one has the right to leave him alone. That determination came gently, quietly, like Eleanor's style, quiet but persistent. When Noah woke for the second time that night, Eleanor gently picked him up and fed him some milk she had just boiled. The baby sucked slowly, eyes half closed. In that moment, Eleanor felt as if she had been transported back in time, back to her old room in Baltimore, the place where she had once lulled her son with breathy lullabies. She hummed softly, a song without words, just a melody every mother would know. Noah pressed his face into her neck. The warmth made her feel stuffy. "I don't know who you are. I don't know what right I have to take care of you. But perhaps God brought me here for a reason I don't know." Eleanor placed a light kiss on Noah's forehead. Then she spoke aloud as softly as a breath. "I will stay tonight, and I will not leave you alone again." As dawn broke, the first rays of sunlight filtered through the thin curtains and shone on Noah's face. He stretched his legs and yawned. Eleanor sat by the fireplace, having not slept all night, Anyone passing by the window could see clearly the fatigue of a sleepless night, but also see something else clearly emerging: attachment. It happened faster than Eleanor expected, so fast it scared her. Am I making a mistake? She wondered. I just got here. I shouldn't be so attached right away. But her head and heart were going in different directions. Her heart said she was chosen to be here. And in that moment, Eleanor realized, sometimes you don't choose where you start over, but that place chooses you. Outside, the sound of hooves echoed from the dirt road. Eleanor turned to look out the window. A figure was approaching, the figure of Hattie Miller, carrying a basket of cornbread and some woolen blankets. Hello, Mrs. Wade. Hattie knocked lightly. I brought some breakfast. It's colder than usual this morning. Eleanor opened the door and took the basket. Thank you, I really appreciate it. Hattie looked at Noah in the crib. Are you taking care of the baby well? It's fine. The baby just fusses a little at night. Hattie stood thoughtful for a moment, then said something Eleanor did not expect. This town is used to living with fear, but we are also used to seeing good people tested. If you plan to stay, know that not everyone will object. Eleanor squinted, not understanding the meaning. What do you mean? Hattie sighed. Caleb has many secrets, and when secrets are exposed, those who are associated with him often get into trouble. Another half-hearted remark made Eleanor feel the mist of Red Valley thicken. Hattie turned away, but before she left, she said, if you ever feel unsafe, come find me, or the sheriff. In Red Valley, the quietest person often knows the most. The words sent a shiver down Eleanor's spine. Not from fear, but from a clear sense that things were only just beginning. When Hattie was gone, Eleanor looked around at the house. It was tidier. Fire was back in the hearth. Warmth was back in the woodwork. And the sounds of children were back in the house, as if the cabin had been without that for too long. Eleanor put her hand on the cradle and whispered, you will have more than just a home. If I am here, you will have a mother. Maybe she spoke too soon. Maybe she shouldn't have spoken when she didn't know what was in store for her. But sometimes, the heart knows what it wants before reason can stop it. And a new truth emerged on the very first morning at Red Valley. Eleanor Wade stayed, not just for the night, but longer. The second morning in Red Valley began not with a rooster crowing, but with the sound of wagon wheels rolling down the dirt road to Caleb's cabin. A strange sound in the usual silence. It was steady, slow, but somehow heavy, as if carrying with it an approaching storm. Eleanor was washing Noah's bottle on the porch when she heard the sound of hooves. She set the bottle down next to the bucket, stood up straight, shielding herself from the sun with her hand, and looked toward the road. A carriage was approaching, a sleek black one with heavy curtains and heavy-duty wheels, the kind only well-to-do families used back east. In that moment, an unknown premonition sent a chill down Eleanor's spine. The carriage stopped in front of the cabin. The wine-colored curtains were drawn aside. A woman stepped out. She was about 50. She stood so straight that even the heavy black flannel coat did not bend her back in the slightest. Her hair was tied back under a small, feathered cap. Her hands were covered with thin leather gloves. Her eyes were cold, gray-green, the eyes of someone who has lived her life by propriety, honor, and rules that no one dares to break. The woman paused a moment in front of the cabin door, as if assessing not just the house, but the land itself. Then she spoke. Are you Eleanor Wade? Her voice was not loud, but it was resonant and clear, like the sound of metal on metal. Eleanor tried to keep her composure. Yes. And you are? The woman did not beat around the bush. I'm Margaret Dawson, Caleb's sister. The words fell, making the air seem thick. Eleanor nodded, searching for words. Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Dawson. Come in. I have something to say about Caleb. Margaret glanced over the porch, then looked into the cabin. We'll talk about everything, Mrs. Wade. But first I want to know, where is the child? Her voice was sharp, not worried. More like a test. Eleanor swallowed. Noah is sleeping inside. Margaret did not wait for further invitation. She walked straight into the cabin. The cabin was still warm from the night before's fire. But the atmosphere changed as soon as Margaret entered, tense, as if the small cabin was not large enough to contain the harsh atmosphere that surrounded this woman. She glanced over everything. The crib, the wool blanket, the few things of Caleb's that Eleanor had packed away in boxes, the coffee cup on the table, the smoldering wood stove. "You clean up pretty well," Margaret said. Not sure if it was a compliment or an observation. Eleanor was silent. She walked over to the crib. Noah slept soundly, breathing evenly, his face clean from his morning bath. Margaret looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned to Eleanor. "I heard you came here in response to Caleb's proposal." "That's right. He wasn't there to pick her up." "Yeah, I'm confused about that too." Margaret frowned. "Caleb is not irresponsible. If he is not here, he cannot be here." The words carried with them the pain she was trying to hide, something Eleanor recognized immediately. Eleanor tried to keep her voice soft. "I hope so." Margaret looked back at the baby in the cradle. Her eyes changed slightly, no longer cold, but with a very slight pang of pity. "But only for a brief moment. I was told that Caleb adopted this child, but no one knows for sure whose child it is." Eleanor said truthfully, "I don't know either. I just know I found her, alone in a dark, cold house." Margaret frowned. "Don't you think it's a bit hasty to take care of a stranger's child, Mrs. Wade?" Eleanor's voice was still calm, but deeper, reaching a level of courage she didn't know she possessed. "Children should never be left alone, no matter whose child they are." Margaret's eyes twitched. She turned away. "Caleb wrote to me that he was expecting a wife, but he didn't say he had adopted a child." A long silence passed between the two women. The small house seemed to shrink in half. Margaret stood up straight, her voice resolute. "I came to Red Valley to settle Caleb's affairs. If he's really dead, I'll take this child back to Hartford. He'll have a good education, a family, a future. This place," she glanced around the cabin, "isn't enough for him." Eleanor felt her chest tighten slightly, not because of Margaret's contemptuous tone, but because of the very real prospect. She might lose Noah, who she had just begun to love, if only for more than a day. But Eleanor did not respond immediately. She breathed slowly. Silence was a way of standing firm. "Mrs. Wade," Margaret continued, "I know you've come from far away. I know you've hoped for a home. But if Caleb doesn't come back, you have no reason to stay here." Eleanor looked up. "I have a reason." She looked at Noah. "This child has no one but us. I'm not saying I have to be his mother, but I know, if I leave now, he'll return to the loneliness he's known for so long." Margaret looked at Eleanor, her eyes softening for the first time. "You say it very nicely, but love alone is not enough. It takes more than that to raise a child." Eleanor smiled slightly. "But people also start from love, not from other things." A strong wind blew through the window, causing the curtains to flutter slightly. The thin light fell on two women, one strong to the point of harshness, the other resilient to the point of gentleness. In that light, an opposition begins to take shape. An opposition that will soon become conflict. Margaret turned and walked out onto the porch. "I'll be back tomorrow. I want to know exactly what you intend, and I hope you understand. I'm not here to fight. I'm here to preserve what Caleb left behind." Eleanor followed to the door. "I don't know what Caleb left her, but Noah wasn't an object." Margaret paused. Her gloved hand tightened slightly. "Watch your words, Mrs. Wade. I'm not as evil as you think." Eleanor shook her head slightly. "I don't think you're cruel. I think you're heartbroken." Margaret spun around. Her eyes looked at Eleanor as if the woman before her had just revealed something she had hidden for years. A very long beat passed. Then Margaret replied softly, "You don't know anything about me." Eleanor smiled sadly. "We all have our own pain. I don't care what it is, but I do know there are children who can help us heal the wounds that adults can't." In that moment, Margaret looked at Eleanor a long time, no longer harsh, no longer judgmental, only the hesitation of a heart that had been closed for too long. "We'll talk more tomorrow." Her voice was a little quieter. Then she turned and got into the car. The carriage rolled on. Red dust flew up in the late afternoon sunlight. Eleanor stood on the porch, watching until the car was just a black dot in the middle of the dirt road. She hugged her arms to her chest, the cold wind penetrating her clothes. But it wasn't the wind that made her shiver, but it was a premonition that her life with Noah would no longer be peaceful. Night fell more slowly than usual in Red Valley that night. It was dark, but the moonlight was strangely bright, as if a thin layer of mist was holding the light back, preventing it from dissipating into the black sky. Eleanor stood by the window, looking out across the pines, listening to the wind scratching at the roof. Noah was asleep. The cabin was silent, except for the steady breathing of the child in a dreamy sleep. Eleanor quietly warmed her hands before the stove, the flames dancing as if to chase away the chill that seeped through the cracks in the wood. But there was another cold, the cold of worry growing in her heart. Margaret Dawson, the woman with steely eyes and a heart hidden behind that stern facade. The woman who had come with a very clear purpose, to take Noah away. Even though she didn't say it outright, Eleanor understood it better than anyone. Since Margaret left, Eleanor's mind kept spinning, like a cartwheel rolling on a rough road without finding a stopping point. What am I doing? I just met the boy less than 2 days ago. But why do I feel like I've known him for a long time? Eleanor sat down next to Noah's crib. Moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating his face. Noah looked as fragile as the first time Eleanor held him. His tiny hand could fit perfectly in her palm. She reached out and gently touched the baby's silky hair. How did I become so attached to you so quickly, Noah? Her voice was so small it was like the wind through the pine trees. There was no answer. But her heart knew clearly. There are children who come into our lives not by calling, but by leaving a void that we had forgotten we were carrying. Noah filled that void. Eleanor woke up at dawn to Noah crying. The sky was still dark, just a faint blue streak on the horizon. She held the baby close, patting his back rhythmically, singing a song without words. Noah buried his face in her neck, his small back trembling and then calming. It felt like a soft cord that tied Eleanor to the child, not out of duty, but something heavier. Instinct. The instinct she thought had died with her son years ago. Eleanor leaned against the wooden wall. The cabin was quiet. Only the sound of her breathing could be heard. She closed her eyes. A stream of thoughts appeared like old letters. Margaret has money. Margaret has power. Margaret is Caleb's only blood relative. Then she whispered the words she feared most. As for me, I am just a stranger from the East. But as soon as the words left Eleanor's mouth, a strong feeling of rebellion rose up inside her. She looked at Noah for a long time, his bright eyes when he was awake, his little hands reaching out to her when he was scared. If I leave, who will hold the baby at night? Who will hear the cry and come running? Who will look at the baby with all their heart? Love makes no promises, but when it chooses someone, it always begins with the question, if not me, then who? In the morning, Eleanor wrapped Hattie's cornflakes in a cloth, made a pot of warm water, and carried Noah out onto the porch. The sky was clear and breezy, the early morning sunlight filtering through the pine trees, leaving shimmering spots on her shirt and Noah's hair. Standing there, she took a deep breath, drawing strength from this new atmosphere. Want to go for a walk? Noah babbled, his eyes shining. Eleanor placed the baby on her back in a sling she had made from an old scarf. The child clung to her shoulder as if afraid of falling. The little arms hugging her made her heart soften to the point of pain. They walked along the dirt road leading into town. The road was still wet with dew. The smell of pine resin and red soil mixed together to create the characteristic scent of the early morning in the west. A man was lighting a fire in the yard. He nodded to Eleanor. Hello, Mrs. Wade. The boy looks better than yesterday. Thank you. The baby slept better last night. A woman carrying 2 buckets of water passed by, smiling. That child is clinging to you. Eleanor squeezed the strap on her shoulder. Maybe she needs an arm. The woman smiled, leaving a more meaningful statement than she thought. Sometimes, the arms need the child as much as the child needs the arms. The words went into Eleanor like a light needle, enough to make her breathe deeper. When she arrived in town, Eleanor stopped at Hattie's grocery store. The small bell on the door jingled as she entered. Hattie looked up immediately. Oh, Noah looks so awake today. The boy wakes up early. Eleanor smiled lightly. Hattie pointed to the newly stocked shelves. I have some soft cloth you can mend the sling with. And here, fresh goat's milk this morning. Eleanor wanted to pay, but Hattie waved her hand. Don't be so hasty. You're not used to Red Valley yet. Here, people depend on each other to survive. No one can go it alone forever. Eleanor bowed her head gratefully. That made her feel like she belonged here a little more. What she didn't expect was for Sheriff Fletcher to walk in right after. When he saw Eleanor and Noah, he smiled gently. Hello, mother and son. Eleanor was slightly startled. The words mother and daughter sounded to her like something she had not yet dared to touch. But hearing them, warmed her up very quickly. "Sheriff, you're here early? There's something I need to tell you." He glanced at Noah. "It might not be easy." Eleanor's heart sank. "What's the matter?" Fletcher sighed, the kind of sigh that signals bad news. "Caleb's hat was found last night, near the North Mountains." Eleanor was silent. Her eyes did not blink. His words were like a small knife, hitting her where she was not prepared. The hat was covered in blood. Fletcher spoke slowly, each word falling onto the wooden floor. Eleanor stood there, Noah hugging her shoulders tightly. In that moment, she understood. Caleb might be dead, and his death would not be normal. The sheriff placed his hand on Eleanor's shoulder, gently but firmly. "Mrs. Wade, there will be an investigation. But before I leave, I need to ask, will you take temporary responsibility for Noah? I must report to the local court before Margaret returns." Eleanor didn't need to think. Yes. Her voice did not tremble. There was no moment's hesitation. "I will take care of the baby." Sheriff nodded. "I believe you will do well." When Eleanor returned to the cabin, her mind was spinning. But Noah kept babbling, his face buried in her shoulder, his hands clutching her shirt as if afraid she would disappear. Eleanor picked the baby up and hugged him. In the silence, she heard Noah's heartbeat, soft, steady, like a reminder. Stay, be the baby's support. She didn't know if she could protect him from Margaret, from the courts, from the things that lurked in the woods. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew one thing. She chose Noah, and she wouldn't take that choice back. She placed her lips on the baby's forehead. "I don't know what will happen, Noah, but I promise I will not leave you." In the wind blowing through the valley, that promise seemed to add a piece of strength to Eleanor's heart, the strength of a mother being reborn from her own pain. That afternoon, the sky over Red Valley was darker than usual. Gray clouds drifted low, seemingly brushing the tops of the old pines. The wind blew down from the mountains to the north, carrying a strange smell of damp earth and cold, a smell that made Eleanor tense with foreboding. After hearing about Caleb's bloody hat, her mind was in such turmoil that she could no longer feel hunger or fatigue. Only one feeling was clear, unease spreading from her stomach to her throat. But Noah was different. The boy was still carefree, still babbling small sounds in his mouth, his hands waving as if trying to reach for the rare sunlight that filtered through the window. Noah's innocence made Eleanor all the more determined to stay calm. "He needs me to be strong," she reminded herself every time her heart wavered. Eleanor placed Noah in the crib by the window and prepared some hot water for milk. As she bent down to get the kettle, a movement in the yard made her pause. The shadow of a person, very fast, gliding under the wooden fence. Eleanor held her breath. The figure didn't look like Margaret. It didn't look like Sheriff Fletcher. It didn't look like one of the townspeople. It was short, quick, and slightly bent like someone used to hiding. She moved gently to the window and hid behind the curtain. The pine trees outside were swaying violently, but through the bushes, Eleanor could see clearly that someone's shoes had just stepped on the dew-dampened ground. One footprint, then two. Then they disappeared into the pine forest. Eleanor's chest tightened. Could it be? "Someone is following me?" Noah made a small sound as if calling for her. Eleanor immediately turned and picked him up. The warmth of his body calmed her, but her heart was still pounding. It took Eleanor a few minutes to calm down enough to put Noah back in his crib. She lit the oil lamp even though it wasn't quite dark yet. The warm yellow light bathed the house, which made her feel a little more at ease. But the light also made the house look like a clear target in the wasteland. "Don't be afraid. Don't let fear blind you. You need me." She stood in the middle of the cabin, her arms wrapped around her, trying to keep her breathing steady. As it was getting dark, the sound of horses came from a distance. At first, Eleanor thought it was Sheriff Fletcher, but the pace was different, steadier, lighter. Not a patrol. Eleanor stood at the door, holding Noah in her arms, watching. A figure on horseback stepped out of the shadows of the forest. The thin moonlight shone down, and Eleanor breathed a sigh of relief when she realized the person was no stranger. "That's Hattie Miller." Hattie tied the horse in front of the cabin and stepped onto the porch. Her face was pale with cold. "I heard the sheriff say he had to go back up the mountain tonight," Hattie said, breathing hard. "He said you shouldn't be alone. I was afraid you'd be cold in the cabin with Noah, so I brought some food and lamp oil." Eleanor smiled slightly. but her eyes were still dazed by the evening darkness. "Thank you. You came just in time." Hattie turned her head, looking out into the dark pine woods behind her. "See anything strange?" The question made Eleanor pause. "What do you mean by that?" Hattie bit her lip, then replied very softly, "Because last night, someone was seen loitering around here. They say he's not from town." The air seemed to freeze. Eleanor touched Noah's back reflexively. "Does anyone know who he is?" Hattie shook her head. "In Red Valley, the scariest thing is not guns or wild animals, but people who come and disappear without anyone knowing where they come from." Eleanor felt a shiver run down her spine. Hattie placed the basket of food on the table and walked over to Eleanor, placing her hand on her shoulder. "If you see anything unusual, come find me tonight. My house is only half a mile away." Eleanor nodded, feeling a warmth begin to creep in. "Thank you. I really appreciate it." Hattie left as darkness fell over the deep forest. The sound of horse hooves faded away. Cold wind seeped through the cracks in the wood, carrying with it the damp smell of earth and the scent of pine needles that had not yet faded. Eleanor closed the door and bolted it tight. It was dark when a slight noise came from outside the cabin. A footstep. Very slow. Very close. Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest. She picked Noah up and backed toward the stove. The footsteps came again, this time clearer, like someone was trying not to make any noise. But not perfectly. The wind changed direction, causing the window to shake slightly. Eleanor let out a small prayer. Then knock. A very light knock on the wall behind the cabin. Not in front of the door. Behind it. There's no way out there. No one should be standing there. Noah began to cry. His cry pierced the deadly silence that had filled the air. Eleanor held the baby tightly, trembling but keeping her voice low. "Shh. It's okay, baby. It's okay." Footsteps moved, circling the cabin, as if the person knew the layout of the house very well. Eleanor looked around for something to defend herself with. A stick of firewood, a small kitchen knife. But in that moment, it was clear. Protecting Noah was her only priority. The footsteps stopped right next to the back door. Eleanor held her breath. Her whole body was frozen. Then the knock came a second time, this time louder. Eleanor felt her legs give way, but she held the baby tight, backing into the corner, trying to keep her breathing as quiet as possible. 1 second, 2 seconds, 10 seconds. There was no more banging, no footsteps leaving. Only an eerie silence surrounded the cabin, as if the person was still there, listening. Eleanor was shaking so much her teeth were chattering. She leaned down and whispered to Noah, "Everything will be okay. I will be with you." A moment later, he couldn't tell how long footsteps were heard, this time fading away. Dry leaves rustled, then silence. Eleanor didn't dare open the door, didn't dare step out, didn't dare breathe heavily. She just sat there, holding Noah, letting the horror slowly fade away. When dawn finally broke, Eleanor dared to step onto the porch. The dirt outside the door bore the imprint of new boots, soft ones, the kind worn by people who had been hiking in the woods. Not the sheriff's, not Hattie's, not the townspeople's. A stranger. Eleanor looked down at the shoe prints, her heart aching. In every cold morning breeze, she realized one thing. Someone is looking for something in this cabin, or worse, looking for Noah. She held the baby in her arms. "I won't let anyone take you from me. Not the darkness, not Caleb's past." Then she looked up at the pine forest to the north where the wind still howled like a warning. And Eleanor knows, her journey through Red Valley will not be all love. It will be filled with danger, loss, and secrets waiting to be revealed. That morning, when Eleanor mustered up the courage to step out of the cabin to examine the strange footprints still imprinted on the ground, the sun had risen above the mountains, but the light was still as pale as mist. The ground was still damp, the mud streaks clearly forming the shape of a foot. The footprints were fresh, sharp, and unmistakable. Eleanor stood still for a long time. Noah hugged her neck tightly as if he could sense the adult's uneasiness. The footprints led behind the cabin, then around to the edge of the pine forest. They did not crisscross like the footsteps of someone searching for their way, nor did they hesitate like the footsteps of someone afraid to show themselves. The gait was calm and sure, as if the person had a purpose, a stopping point, and knew exactly what he was doing. Not a child, not a drunkard, not Margaret. It was the step of someone familiar with the terrain. A bushman. Someone used to following the tracks of animals or people. Eleanor felt a chill down her spine even though the sunlight was on her shoulders. A voice behind her startled her. "You shouldn't be standing here alone." Eleanor turned. It was Sheriff Fletcher, riding a dark brown horse. His beard was gray, his eyes narrowed from the sun, and his face was one accustomed to the evils of this land. "Why are you here so early?" Eleanor asked. "I can't sleep," Fletcher replied. "And when a man can't sleep in Red Valley, something's wrong." He dismounted and bent down to look at the shoe prints. His brows furrowed. "These are not townspeople's shoes," he said, his voice low, "nor the kind a newcomer would wear." "So who is it?" Eleanor asked softly. Sheriff stood up, looking Eleanor straight in the eyes. "There are several groups of people who live around the northern mountains." He spoke slowly and heavily. "They don't like strangers. They don't like trouble. And especially, they don't like anyone coming near what they consider their territory." Eleanor held Noah closer. "You think they are watching this cabin?" "I'm not sure." Fletcher looked toward the woods. "But this cabin used to be Caleb's. And Caleb—" He stopped. Eleanor held her breath. "Caleb. What?" The sheriff took a deep breath, as if weighing each word. "I think Caleb had something to do with the people who lived along the mountain range. Borrowing, trading, or doing something illegal? I don't know. But when a man disappears and mountain people appear around the cabin, that's no coincidence." Eleanor felt her heart ache. "So Noah has something to do with this?" The sheriff looked at Noah for a long moment. "In the West, sometimes children witness things they should never see." He continued, his voice hoarse. "But I think Noah isn't the witness. He's the reason." Eleanor squeezed the baby tightly in her arms, as if that was the only way to keep her breathing. "Can you be more specific?" She tried to keep her voice calm. Sheriff Fletcher did not answer at once. He bent down again, examined the print carefully, and touched it lightly with the tip of his finger. "Mrs. Wade." His voice dropped. "This child was not brought back by Caleb by chance. I fear someone wants it back." Eleanor was stunned. "No way. No one has come looking for him all this time. No one has asked or mentioned Noah." But as she said those words, she realized the truth that made her shudder. The only person who came looking for the baby was the one who showed up last night. The sheriff looked at her, seeing the fear growing in Eleanor's eyes. He placed his hand on her upper arm, lightly but enough to steady her. "Mrs. Wade, if anything happens, the first thing you need to do is bring Noah to my house. Don't hesitate." Eleanor nodded. "As for the man from last night, do you think he will come back?" Sheriff said frankly, "Certainly." A moment later, Fletcher went to check the woods around the cabin. Eleanor was left standing on the porch, Noah in her arms, a small sliver of light in the spreading darkness. Eleanor looked at the pines, at the dirt road, at the footprints. A vague fear she had felt since arriving in Red Valley became clear. The silence of the land was no longer peaceful. It was like a thick blanket covering some scream buried beneath. She went back inside. She put Noah in the crib. Then she stood there, looking at his brown hair, at his eyes, always wide and observing everything. "You know," her voice was as small as a breath, "I used to think there was no more room in my heart. I used to think it was worn out with loss." Eleanor's hand shook slightly as she stroked her forehead. "But it seems you've reopened a door I thought would never open again." At noon, Eleanor went to Hattie's house to get some sugar and flour. The weather was cold but dry, and the smell of the wind brought a rare sense of comfort. When Eleanor entered the grocery store, Hattie was stocking shelves. "Eleanor, I was just coming to look for you," Hattie said. Then, lowering her voice, "I heard someone saw strange shoe prints behind your cabin." "Yes, I saw it too," Eleanor said honestly. "The sheriff said it might have been someone from the mountains." Hattie put her hand to her chest. "Oh my God, how can you calm down?" Eleanor took a deep breath. "I have to calm down. Noah can't stand it if I panic." Hattie looked at her for a long time. Then, she said something that made Eleanor turn her head. "Mrs. Wade, you may not realize it, but everyone in town sees how strongly attached you are to Noah." "It's not that I'm strong," Eleanor smiled sadly. "It's just that my heart knows its choice is right." Hattie stepped forward and took Eleanor's hand. "As long as you stand here in Red Valley, No one is allowed to separate you and Noah. Not even Margaret. Not even the court. Eleanor looked at her friend, so moved she was speechless. On the way back to the cabin, Eleanor walked slowly. She wanted a few minutes to think in the silence of the valley. Noah lay in a sling on his back, sleeping soundly, breathing evenly and warm. But as soon as the cabin came into view, she stopped immediately. The front door was ajar, even though she had locked it this morning. Eleanor stood motionless. Her heart seemed to stop. There was no sound inside. No shadow. No other breathing. Only the door opened as a warning. She didn't rush in. Instead, Eleanor took a step back, holding Noah close to her back, taking in every detail. The woodwork, the windows, the base of the wall. No shoe prints in the dirt on the porch. The stranger entered through the back door. Eleanor walked to the door and pushed it open. It made a long, creaking sound. Inside, the cabin was intact. No furniture was turned upside down. Nothing had been taken. Only one thing changed. The cradle was turned the other way. No one in town would do that. No one would have any reason to be in this cabin during the day. No one except last night. Eleanor held her head, trying to calm her breathing. But every pounding heartbeat in her chest said the same thing. That person wasn't just looking for the cabin. That person was looking for Noah. And like a cold needle piercing her heart, Eleanor understood that this matter was no longer just Caleb's mystery. Noah is at the center of it all. She held the baby close. Its warmth steadied her in the darkening room like an open wound. In silence, Eleanor said a sentence like an oath. No matter what happens, I won't let anyone take you away. That afternoon, as Eleanor stood in the cabin, her arms around Noah as if shielding her from the outside world, she felt a painful realization dawn on her. There was no turning back. Once someone has entered the cabin, sneaked in, touched the crib, and then left without a trace, that means they can do it again. Next time, they might not just turn the crib. Next time, they might put their hands in there. The thought made Eleanor squeeze Noah tighter, her hands shaking. He buried his face in her neck, smelling the scent of pine and the salty sweat on her collar. He made a soft M sound, a comforting breath, and Eleanor's heart ached with pity. My child. Her voice was as small as the fading sunlight. I don't know how long I can hold out, but I swear I won't let anyone separate me from you. Noah nodded, his small hand touching her chin in answer. The child's trust made her stronger, strong in a way only those who had lost could understand. Eleanor spent the afternoon checking every corner of the room. The back door, the wooden bars, the window frame where someone had tampered with it, still had a faint mark. Fear did not unnerve her. On the contrary, it sharpened Eleanor, as a woman in the West must become when a man is absent from the house. She nailed the back door shut with an old piece of wood, reinforcing it with 2 large nails. Then she placed a heavy wooden table across the door. She knew that if someone was determined to break it down, they would still get in. But at least they would have to make enough noise for her to hear. Noah slept in a sling on her back while she did everything. His breathing, warm and alive, helped steady her breathing. When she was done, Eleanor carried Noah out onto the porch. She sat in the old wooden chair, watching the sunset fall over the valley like a slow, sad stream of hot honey. The mountains to the north darkened where Caleb's bloody hat had been found. Caleb, Eleanor whispered, if you are alive, give me a sign. If you are dead, help me protect this child. She was not a superstitious woman, but in the West, sometimes faith is not a choice, but a rope that helps people get through the darkest days. The road back to town shimmered in the twilight, and then Eleanor saw 2 horsemen approaching the cabin. A familiar tall figure, Sheriff Fletcher. The other one made Eleanor's heart skip a beat. The carriage was luxurious, the curtains crimson, and on the white horse, Margaret Dawson. She arrived sooner than Eleanor expected. Quick, decisive, like someone used to handling family matters with an iron fist. Eleanor stood up, Noah in her arms. The sheriff rode forward, touching the brim of his hat. Eleanor. Good. You're safe. Margaret dismounted, adjusting her long cloak. Her gaze swept the cabin as if checking to see if the place was worthy of her presence. Mrs. Wade. Her voice rang out, cold as freshly sharpened steel. I have come back today. To speak frankly. Eleanor looked straight at her. Noah is sleeping. Please don't wake him. For a moment, A very moment Margaret's eyes softened, but only for a breath. "We'll talk quietly," Margaret said, stepping onto the porch. The sheriff stood between them, as if trying to keep the peace. "Before you two continue, I must tell you something, Margaret." He held out a woolen scarf containing something. When he opened it, both Eleanor and Margaret fell silent. Caleb's hat, and the dried blood inside. Margaret's knees buckled a little. Not enough to fall, but enough to show she was struggling. Eleanor took a reflexive step forward, intending to support her, but Margaret held up a hand. "I'm fine." Her voice shook the first time Eleanor had heard it. "We're investigating," Sheriff continued. "We're not saying Caleb is dead, but it doesn't look good." Margaret took a deep breath and stood up straight, strong as someone who had carried a family since she was young. "I get it." Then her eyes turned to Noah in Eleanor's arms. "So, Caleb is no longer here to protect the child." Her voice was small, hoarse. Eleanor held Noah closer. "But I'm here." Margaret looked deep into Eleanor's eyes, as if looking into her soul. "Mrs. Wade, why are you taking care of him? Do you owe my brother something?" Eleanor shook her head. "I don't owe Caleb. I just can't leave a child behind." Margaret narrowed her eyes. "In his letter to me, Caleb said he was looking for someone to help him settle down, but he didn't say anything about a baby. Not a word." Sheriff interjected. "It's likely Caleb wanted to keep it a secret, maybe to protect the baby." Margaret turned to Fletcher. "You two are protecting Mrs. Wade. But what about me? I am Caleb's only blood relative. I have a right to know who he is, whose son he is." Eleanor's voice was still calm but heavier. "If Caleb doesn't tell you, it means the truth could be very painful, or very dangerous." Margaret looked at Noah. "For a long time, a very long time." Then she said softly, "This child is Caleb's biological child?" Eleanor felt the pain in that question, the pain of guilt, responsibility, and unfulfilled love. "I don't know," Eleanor replied honestly. Margaret clenched her leather gloves. "Then I can't leave this child in this situation. Caleb is missing. Strangers are showing up. You are just the woman he's going to marry. You have no right to keep the child." The words, though gentle, felt like a cold knife to Eleanor's heart. But she did not get angry. She did not react with haste. She replied with the calm that years of loss had brought. "I don't babysit. I protect." "Margaret in?" the sheriff Chong and the Rees asked. The pine forests in the north rustled softly in the afternoon wind, as if testifying to that saying. After a while, Margaret turned away to look at the mountains, her voice lower. "Eleanor Wade, I'm not evil. I didn't come here to take anyone's child. I came because I was scared. Scared that Caleb would die. Scared that I would lose someone else. And if he left anything behind, I need to know I'm protecting him." Eleanor calmed down a beat. She took a step closer to Margaret. "I understand that pain. And if he's the only thing left of Caleb, then I understand your concern." Margaret turned back, tears in her eyes for the first time. "Then give me the baby." Eleanor shook her head. Not loudly, not harshly, just shook her head very gently but very firmly. "Not now. Not while someone is looking for her." Eleanor looked Margaret straight in the eyes. "If you want to protect your grandchild, protect it with me." Margaret paused. Sheriff also looked at Eleanor in surprise. In that moment the world seemed to slow down. Margaret touched the small crib next to Eleanor. "With you?" she asked absent-mindedly. "Yes," Eleanor nodded. "Whether Caleb lives or dies, we are the only people he can rely on." The wind blew through the valley. Pine needles fell on the cabin roof. A horse neighed softly in the distance. Margaret looked at Noah, then back at Eleanor. Finally, she whispered, "Okay, but if there's danger here, I want to know everything." Eleanor replied, "So tomorrow, I will tell you about last night." In the twilight, two women, strangers, opposites, wounded, stand side by side, united by a small child sleeping soundly in Eleanor's arms. That evening, the weather in Red Valley turned cold earlier than usual. The wind blew down from the mountains to the north, bringing a crisp, dry chill, as if the pines were reminding people that the night would not be peaceful. Eleanor closed the cabin door, refastened the window cords, and lit a small fire in the fireplace. The flickering fire cast a warm orange glow against the wooden walls, making the room seem larger and less lonely. Noah slept in the crib next to her, The crib that had been turned this morning by someone's hand. Every time Eleanor looked at it, she felt a small crack in her heart, like the wood of a cabin cracking when winter came too early. The door knocked twice. Eleanor jumped to her feet, instinctively hugging Noah. Sheriff Fletcher's voice rang out. "It's me." "Open the door." Eleanor exhaled, then opened the door. Fletcher stood there with an oil lamp in his hand. Behind him, the wind carried the scent of pine and cold earth. "Are you okay?" "Okay," Eleanor replied. "Or at least, I try to be." The sheriff put the lamp on the table and sat down in a chair by the fire. He did not speak in a hurry. This attitude made Eleanor even more worried. Finally, he sighed. "I think it's time you knew everything I know about Caleb Dawson." Eleanor sat down, pulling the woolen shawl over her legs. "You should know," Margaret said from the door. She had arrived, leaning against the cabin doorframe, her face sad but determined. "I want to hear more." Eleanor invited Margaret in. She sat down on the other chair, not too far from Eleanor, not too close, just enough to keep the tension between them at a safe distance. The sheriff looked at the two women, one who had raised the child, one who had Dawson blood, and then he began. "About 8 months ago, Caleb came to Red Valley. His voice was even, as if he were talking about something that happened in a previous life, even though it had really only been less than a year. He rented this cabin from Old Man Jessup. Caleb looked tired then, like he had run away from a long way away." Margaret stifled a breath, but Eleanor heard it. Sheriff continued. "Caleb isn't a bad man, but he has a habit of getting into other people's trouble, especially those who live in the northern mountains." Eleanor shivered. "You mean the group of people scattered along the mountain range?" Fletcher nodded. "They weren't criminals in the legal sense, but they didn't like the government. They didn't like being questioned, and Caleb helped one of them." Margaret raised her head. "Help? Or cause trouble?" "Both," Fletcher replied bluntly. He pulled the lamp closer, the golden light reflecting off his eyes, deep and full of years of experience. "There was a young woman, Marilla. She lived with the group. She wanted to leave, taking a child with her, but she wasn't allowed." Eleanor's heart jumped. "That child." Sheriff looked at Eleanor. "Yes, it was Noah." The room fell silent. The crackling of the fire could be heard like a pin dropping. Eleanor shook her head. "But Noah doesn't look like Caleb." "Because Noah wasn't Caleb's," Fletcher said slowly. "But Caleb loved him like his own son. Marilla asked him to take the child. She didn't dare show herself because she was afraid. The people in the mountains would come after her." Margaret bowed her head, her hands clasped together. "I don't know anything about this. My brother kept it all from me. I think Caleb wanted to protect her," Fletcher said. "And the child." Eleanor put Noah on her shoulder, her heart in turmoil. "If Caleb isn't the baby's father, then who are the biological parents?" "Marilla is mother," Fletcher replied. "As for father, no one knows for sure. She never said." Margaret looked at Eleanor for a long time. "So the baby isn't Dawson family blood?" Sheriff shook his head. "No, but Caleb loves her. He sees Noah as his chance to redeem himself." Eleanor felt her eyes sting. "What mistake?" Fletcher looked at Margaret, as if asking if he could continue. Margaret nodded slightly. "Caleb was involved in something that seriously injured someone in Boston. It wasn't intentional, but the consequences are the consequences." Margaret closed her eyes, trying to keep the house from spinning. "My brother left Boston because he felt he didn't deserve to stay. I couldn't stop him." The sheriff put his hands on his knees and continued. "When Caleb got Marilla and Noah out of the area, the other group found out. They were very angry. Caleb had to create a diversion, take Marilla to another town. As for Noah, he brought her back to this cabin." Eleanor held Noah close to her chest, patting his back gently, as if trying to protect him from the wind that still howled outside. "Where is Marilla?" asked Margaret. The sheriff looked her straight in the eye. "I think Marilla is dead." No one said another word for several minutes. Eleanor looked at Noah's tiny hands clutching at her collar, her heart aching at the thought of a desperate mother handing her baby to Caleb in the cold darkness, hoping someone would save him. Margaret slowly stood up and walked over to Eleanor. Her eyes, once filled with judgment, were now filled with sadness. "Eleanor," Margaret said hoarsely, I apologize for doubting you. Eleanor shook her head. There's nothing to apologize for. Yes, Margaret confirmed. I came here to claim Noah, thinking it was my responsibility. But now I understand. Caleb entrusted him to someone he trusted, and that person was you. The wind howled louder outside, beating against the cabin walls. But inside the small room, the air was as calm as a candle held between two hands. Sheriff stood up. I'll be on the porch tonight. I think the people coming into the cabin during the day are a sign they're coming back. Eleanor shuddered. You think they want Noah? No doubt about it, said Fletcher. They see the child as an old debt. They won't give up. Margaret moved to stand next to Eleanor, as if the choice had been made. If necessary, I will stay tonight. Eleanor was surprised, but did not refuse. Having two people by her side, a woman of iron determination, and a sheriff who knew the mountains well, made her feel better. The fireplace crackled. Noah breathed evenly in his mother's arms. The wind blew harder, and a low growl echoed from the woods as if someone were calling. In the silence, Eleanor said one sentence, not loud, not soft, but enough for the whole cabin to hear. Then, let's protect the baby together tonight. Margaret touched Eleanor's shoulder lightly. A family sometimes begins at times like this, Sheriff added, and sometimes family is a choice, not blood. Eleanor looked at the two of them, then at Noah, and knew, from this moment on, she was no longer fighting alone. Outside the cabin, night was creeping over the northern mountains, like the shadow of something approaching. But inside the cabin, the fire still burned, keeping warmth, keeping hope, keeping the tiny life sleeping in her arms. Tonight wouldn't be an easy night, but Eleanor was ready, because for the first time since arriving in Red Valley, she had something worth fighting for. Night fell over Red Valley as if someone had covered the land with a thick, silent blanket. The pines to the north rustled incessantly, but the wind tonight was different. It was not so much the singing of the pines as the whispering of things left unsaid. Inside the cabin, Eleanor placed Noah in his crib and covered his chest with a soft woolen blanket. The firelight reflected off his cheeks, making his face look like a sleeping angel in the wild. Eleanor gently touched his hair. With each touch, she felt a bond between her heart and the child grow deeper, deeper even than any other relationship she had ever had. Margaret sat by the window, her arms folded, her eyes scanning the swaying shadows of the trees outside, the habit of a woman who had protected her family from things others never knew. Sheriff Fletcher stood on the porch, his chair leaning against a pillar, his gun resting on his lap. The oil lamp hanging above the porch cast a yellow light on the porch like an arm holding back the night, preventing it from swallowing the small cabin. Eleanor knew that everything hung by a thread tonight, but she remained calm. She was no longer easily broken. The losses of her life had forged her into a silence like steel, a silence that had the strength to face fear with a stubborn but calm heart. Margaret said softly, Eleanor, if they really come, will you be scared? Simple question, but not easy to answer. Eleanor touched Noah's crib. Scared, but some fears make people stronger, not weaker. Margaret tilted her head. You mean Noah? Yes. Eleanor turned to look straight into those deep blue eyes. When a child depends on you to survive, you will do anything, even things you think you don't have the courage to do. I've never been a mother, but I know this is the first time in my life I truly feel needed. A flash of emotion crossed Margaret's face, the kind of emotion that only comes when one sees the meaning of one's own presence through another. Margaret said softly, I think I understand. When my parents died, Caleb was just a skinny, scared boy. I had to play mother, father, sister, all at once. I never had a chance to be weak. Then she looked at Eleanor. Maybe you are like me, but in a warmer way. Eleanor smiled slightly, neither proud nor humble. Not warmer. It's just, I chose love over running away. Margaret nodded, as if learning something from Eleanor, the woman she had once considered strange and unworthy. There was a slight noise on the porch. The whole cabin was silent. Margaret stood up, but Eleanor raised her hand to signal silence. The wind howled louder. The pine branches beat against each other with a deafening sound. But amidst the natural sounds of the night, there was another sound. A footstep. Slow, clear, purposeful. Sheriff Fletcher whispered from behind the door. I heard. Margaret moved closer to Eleanor. "Take Noah." Eleanor didn't reply. She bent down and picked Noah up from the crib. The baby stirred slightly, his eyes opening slightly, but he immediately buried his head in Eleanor's shoulder, as if sensing something was wrong but still trusting her completely. The sheriff pushed the door open and spoke softly through the crack. A man, not an animal, not drunk. Margaret clenched her fists. They came for Noah. Eleanor felt her heart pounding so hard it hurt, but she kept her voice calm. "If they come for the baby, they'll have to get through me first." The footsteps stopped. Sheriff stood up straight, his hand on the butt of his gun. The oil lamp on the porch swayed slightly in the wind, casting a swaying shadow on the ground. A man's voice rang out, hoarse, deep, with the voice of someone who had lived in the mountains for too long. "I don't want to fight." "Then tell me who you are." The sheriff growled. Silent. Then the man said, "I am Marilla's brother." The whole cabin was dead silent. No one breathed. No one moved. Eleanor hugged Noah tighter. It felt like the mountain wind was piercing her heart. Sheriff asked, "What are you doing here?" "Take the baby back." The man's voice was low, like stones rolling in a cave. "Noah is my flesh and blood. My sister died trying to protect him. I can't let anyone else have him." Margaret took a step forward. Her voice was steady but sharp as a knife. "Your sister gave her life to bring Noah to safety. So you think the best thing to do now is to drag him back into danger?" The man's voice rose a little, filled with pain rather than violence. "My sister doesn't want him to grow up far from home." Eleanor now stepped closer to the door, not opening it wide, just standing behind it, Noah leaning against her shoulder. "But your sister chose to give it to Caleb," Eleanor said, her voice soft but strangely strong. "Not to you." He was silent. The sheriff leaned over to look at Eleanor, noticing she was doing something even those used to fighting found difficult, facing her fear with a calm voice. The man on the porch said, "Caleb is dead." Margaret bit her lip until it bled. Eleanor closed her eyes for a second, then opened them. "Are you sure?" "I found a trail. Caleb was ambushed near the shallows. None of us could have survived that part if we lost that much blood." Sheriff Fletcher clenched his jaw, the expression of a man pained by bad news but refusing to let himself break down. The man continued, "I did not come to harm the child. I came because I have a responsibility." "And so do I," Eleanor replied immediately. "But you are not blood," he said. Eleanor pressed her cheek against Noah's head. "Blood isn't the only thing that holds people together." Her voice was as soft as the wind but sharper than steel. "There are still choices. There is still love. There are still promises." He was silent. A long time. The wind howled fiercely, tearing through the cabin walls. The fireplace crackled. Noah's warm breathing seemed to keep Eleanor steady in the night. Then the man said a sentence that made the whole cabin fall into a choking state. "My sister loved Caleb." His voice was hoarse, and before she died, she said that if anyone was good enough to raise Noah, it would be the woman Caleb chose. Eleanor felt her legs go weak. Margaret reached out and gently supported her elbow. The man continued, "So I came here, not to get the baby back, but to see if the one Caleb chose is worthy." "You saw it," whispered the sheriff. There was a long silence. Then came the answer, slow, heavy as stone. "Yes, I see." A sound of footsteps retreating on the ground. A sigh. And then his voice, softer, different from before. "I won't take the baby, but someone else will come." Eleanor squeezed Noah so tightly that she was afraid she would hurt him. "Who else?" Margaret asked immediately. "Those of us, not all of us," replied the man. "There are some who have not forgiven Marilla for running away, and they think Noah is their property to take back." The sheriff stood up. "How many?" The man answered softly, as if speaking to the darkness. It was too much for her to handle alone. Eleanor felt her hands go cold, but she kept her voice steady. "So what are you here for?" He replied with a sentence that surprised the whole cabin. "To warn, and to protect Noah from afar." Eleanor asked, "Why?" He was silent for a few seconds. Then he said, "Because my sister died to save it, and I won't let that death be in vain." With that, he left. No hurried footsteps, no unusual rustling. Simply, leave as part of the darkness. The sheriff let go of the gun. Margaret exhaled so hard her shoulders shook. Eleanor held Noah close, tears falling into his hair not from fear, but from the sense of loss and gain, worry and hope, all of it merging into a sweet pain that made her heart clench. Tonight, she knew one thing: the real storm was just beginning. But in the midst of that storm, she had fire. She had Noah. She had Margaret. She had Sheriff Fletcher. She had the choice to be a mother, a choice no one could take away. The morning after that eventful night, the mountain sunlight filtered through the small window like thin, fragile golden threads. Eleanor opened her eyes, though she had slept only a few hours. Margaret was still sitting by the window, her head leaning lightly against the chair. She must have fallen asleep near dawn, her alert posture so stiff her shoulders and neck. Sheriff Fletcher was still on the porch. The oil lamp had gone out, replaced by morning light that bathed the porch and his dusty boots. In the fragile peace, there was a soft snore, a snore Eleanor recognized as the sheriff's after a sleepless night. Eleanor sat up, careful not to wake Noah. He was still in his crib, his tiny arms raised as if to cradle his warm dream. One person stood up first, Margaret. She stretched her neck, then looked at Eleanor with a mixture of confusion and fatigue in her eyes. "Are you okay?" Margaret asked softly. Eleanor nodded slightly. "Fine. How about you?" "I've had some rough nights, but nothing like this," Margaret said, stepping closer to the crib, seeing him sleeping so peacefully. "I can't believe someone tried to take him away last night." Eleanor shielded her face from the light. "Noah doesn't know. Maybe it's just luck." Margaret placed her hands on the edge of the crib, her voice low. "This child really has a pull. He makes me feel like I have a responsibility to keep him safe. I don't know why." Eleanor replied softly, "Maybe because Noah needed a family, and we all know we lacked that." Margaret paused for a second, as if thinking. Then she said softly, "Perhaps that's true." The sheriff opened the door and stepped in, stretching like a man accustomed to wandering from town to town. "It's good that you're both alive," he said with a dry but well-meaning smile. "Do you think he'll come back?" Eleanor asked. Fletcher stroked his beard. "Not him. But he's right." He looked north. "The others will be coming down to the valley sooner or later. Not to talk, but to reclaim what they think is theirs." Margaret crossed her arms, her eyes sharp. "We can wait for them to come. Or we can act first." The sheriff looked at Margaret with a mixture of respect and concern. "Going first? Are you planning to put the whole town in danger?" Margaret replied in the tone of someone who understood duty better than power. "I'm not saying we must fight. I'm saying we must prepare. And more importantly," she turned to Eleanor, "we must find out why Noah is a target." Eleanor sat down in her chair. The revelations from Marilla's brother last night were still swirling in her head. Marilla dying trying to protect Noah. Caleb missing after taking the baby. The Northerners considering Noah a liability. A mysterious thread wraps around the child's origins. And Eleanor knows that. To protect Noah, she must follow that thread to its very end. "I'll give this to a few people I trust in town," said the sheriff. "Not many. Just those who are tight-lipped enough." Margaret nodded. "Good." Eleanor asked, "And me? What should I do?" Sheriff looked at Eleanor for a long time and then replied, "You must regain your strength. You must take care of Noah as usual. If you let him get upset, the danger will be doubled." Eleanor bent over the crib and pulled the blanket over Noah. "Then things won't change." Margaret stepped forward and touched Eleanor's shoulder. "No, things have changed. But you're not alone anymore." Eleanor took a deep breath. She needed that more than she thought. That afternoon, Hattie Miller brought a basket of food. The grocer's eyes widened as she entered the cabin when she saw Margaret sitting calmly at the table, smiling softly at Noah. "Oh my God," Hattie whispered. "I can't imagine those two having tea together." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" "Well, a few months ago, I was going to sue Mrs. Wade," Hattie replied, as straightforward as she was. Eleanor chuckled lightly, feeling a bit of normalcy for the first time in days. Margaret pursed her lips, trying not to smile. "People can change, Hattie," Eleanor interjected, "or at least understand each other better." Hattie watched the two of them go back and forth and said softly, "I like this better than the baby fight. But even though I like it, I have to say this." Both Eleanor and Margaret turned back. Hattie put the basket down on the table. "There are rumors going around town." Sheriff asked immediately, "What station?" Hattie glanced at Noah and continued. They say the Northmen have come down the mountain. Someone saw a strange man near the road to Harris Farm. And, Hattie lowered her voice, someone saw blood on the rocks near the woods. Margaret clutched the hem of her dress. Eleanor shivered slightly. The sheriff stood up, as if all his alert circuits had lit up at once. When, 2 nights ago, Fletcher tightened his grip on his gun. It gets worse. Hattie put her hand on Eleanor's shoulder. My dear, if you need anything, my door is always open. Eleanor took Hattie's hand. Thanks, but I'm not running away. Hattie nodded. I know. You're the type who takes it all in stride. But if you do fall, don't fall alone. That sentence made Margaret turn her head to look at Eleanor for a long time, as if realizing that the strength of the woman before her was not blind resistance, but a quality forged from deep losses in life. In the afternoon, the cabin was bathed in pale yellow sunlight. Eleanor fed Noah and put him to sleep. Margaret stayed behind to help chop vegetables and fix the cupboards, all things she had never done before but did with surprising care. When things calmed down, Eleanor sat alone at the dining table. Her hand touched the tiny bracelet Noah wore, the only remaining gift from Marilla. She looked at it and the questions came back. Who was Noah's father? Why did those people treat him like property? Why did Marilla risk her life? Why did Caleb get involved and then disappear? Those questions are like long shadows spread under the afternoon sun, shapeless, boundaryless, but heavily present. Margaret sat down opposite, not asking but knowing Eleanor was lost in thought. Are you worried? Margaret asked. Eleanor looked up. Not worried, but wondering if I am strong enough to withstand what is coming. Margaret smiled slightly. Power is not something you have. It is something you create when you have no other choice. Eleanor sighed. After all, I realized I wasn't just protecting Noah. I was using Noah to heal my own wounds too. Margaret placed her hand on Eleanor's. We all do, Eleanor. Each of us carries wounds. The difference is, you choose love to heal. The words moved Eleanor to the point of choking. As the afternoon wore on, Sheriff returned to the cabin with new information. A new trail has been found. Someone has camped near the stream half a mile from here. Not from the town. Margaret asked immediately, do they have weapons? Yes, replied Fletcher, and they made no secret of their intention to frighten the people. Eleanor felt cold at hearing that. The sheriff looked at the 2 women. If that group continues down the mountain, the town will be scared. And when they are scared, they do stupid things. Margaret raised her eyebrows. You mean they will pressure us to bring Noah out? Sheriff sighed. Red Valley is good, but that doesn't mean they're on the right side. Eleanor hugged Noah's crib tightly. So how do we protect the baby? She asked. Sheriff looked at Eleanor for a long time before speaking the most difficult words. Maybe. You need to leave Red Valley for a while. Margaret turned to Eleanor. No, she can't go alone. Sheriff nodded. I'm not saying she went alone. But the fact is, this place is going to be a hot spot. And Noah is the reason. Eleanor was silent. Her heart felt like it was split in 2. Part of her wanted to run away from this place immediately, to protect Noah from any danger. The other part wanted to cling to Red Valley, the place where, for the first time, she felt like she had a family. Finally, she said, her voice very soft but full of weight, I will go, if that is the only way. Margaret put her hand on Eleanor's shoulder. And I will go with you. The sheriff stepped closer. Me too. Eleanor looked at them both, and then at the sleeping Noah, and knew that her life was about to enter a very different chapter, one filled with uncertainty, with insecurity, but with love, with loyalty, and with courageous choice. She spoke softly, like a promise uttered in the dusk. If we have to go, then we will go as a family. Outside, the mountain wind began to pick up. Something was moving in the darkness, but inside the cabin a small family was taking shape, and they are ready. The next morning, as the sun crept over the mountaintops, Eleanor stood at the stove, cooking a pot of oatmeal for Noah and making hot tea for Margaret and Sheriff Fletcher. The small cabin was strangely quiet, as if it knew today was the day something important would happen. Margaret was up early. She stood on the porch in the mist, touching the wooden railing and looking down into the valley as if weighing something very heavy. Sheriff Fletcher quietly prepared the horse behind the cabin. The movements were familiar. Saddle, check the bridle, examine the bag of provisions. He did it all with the calmness of a man who had faced danger many times but never let it break him. Eleanor watched them both through the window, and in that moment, she understood one thing clearly. No matter how scared she was not alone. Noah sat on her lap, his eyes bright, still not understanding what was happening. He waved his little hands, wanting to touch the warmth from the fire. Eleanor stroked her hair and whispered, "We're leaving, baby. But I promise, wherever we go, you'll be safe." Margaret entered the cabin, took off her scarf, and placed it on the table. "We're leaving this afternoon." Her voice was firm, but her eyes held a slight twinge of regret. "This afternoon?" Eleanor repeated. "Yes." Sheriff said the mountain men appeared near the stream. "If they go down a few miles, Red Valley will no longer be safe." Eleanor looked around the cabin, this small room, where she had held Noah through his crying nights, where she had thought she could no longer go on, where she had learned what it was like to be a mother. It was no longer just a cabin. It was a part of her heart. But a mother's heart always knows what to do first. "Okay," Eleanor nodded. "Let's go." Sheriff walked in just as the two women were packing. "I think we have 3 options." He spread the map out on the table. "East to Silver Creek, but that road has steep slopes and could be blocked. South to Half Moon Ridge, closer to town, but easily tracked. Or west over the grassy hills. Longer, but harder to track and safer." Margaret looked at Eleanor. "What do you think?" Eleanor placed her hand on her chest, as if trying to hear her heart answer. "We have Noah. We can't take the easy road. We have to take the safest road." Sheriff nodded. "West, then, it's decided." The 3 began to prepare. The sheriff packed provisions: flour, bacon, some potatoes, and hard biscuits. Margaret prepared 2 large woolen blankets, ice medicine, and a small bottle of wine for colder nights. She said half-jokingly. Eleanor prepared the one thing she considered most important when leaving the cabin: Noah's small crib. Not to carry, but to clean it, wipe it clean, and then place it in the middle of the room as the end of a chapter. Her fingers trembled as she stroked the cradle edge. How many nights she had sat beside him, singing lullabies her mother had taught her. How many times she had fallen asleep with her head against the cradle edge, because Noah wouldn't sleep when the wind blew. How much hope and pain was healed here. Margaret stood at the door, quietly looked at Eleanor for a moment, then said very softly, "You can take it. We have horses." Eleanor shook her head, smiling sadly. "No. The crib is for the first days. Noah is no longer an abandoned child. He is about to enter a new life, and so am I." Margaret looked at her, and for the first time, there was no disapproval, just deep respect. As the sun rose, word began to spread throughout town. People passed by the cabin, asking questions, worrying, handing out food, at least those who had witnessed Eleanor caring for Noah all this time. Mrs. Henderson brought bread. The blacksmith brought a small knife. Little Emma Hattie's daughter brought a piece of blue cloth for Noah to hug to sleep. But there were other eyes too. Fear, questioning, avoiding. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew. Noah was no longer just the kid in the valley. He was the center of a mystery the town wanted no part of. Hattie Miller came last, out of breath from the rapid climb. "I heard you were leaving town," Hattie said, putting her hands on her hips. "Yes," Eleanor replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Are you scared?" Eleanor chuckled. "Yes, but I have no other choice." Hattie looked at Noah in Eleanor's arms. His eyes were wide open, looking at everything with an innocent ignorance of danger. "So remember this," Hattie said, squeezing Eleanor's hand tightly. "There are children who come into this world to make adults better. Noah seems to be one of them." Eleanor choked. "Thank you, Hattie." Hattie hugged her gently. "Go. Don't look back, unless you know you're safe." By afternoon, everything was ready. Margaret rode her white horse, her back straight but her eyes full of worry. Sheriff Fletcher led the pack horse. Eleanor put on her thickest cloak and held Noah in a sling to her chest to keep him warm. The 3 stood in front of the cabin, the small wooden house that Eleanor had called her first home. "When you're ready, we'll go," the sheriff said softly. Eleanor turned back to look at the cabin one last time. The wooden wall cracked slightly. The fire was out. The cradle stood in the middle of the room, like the first child born of courage. Eleanor felt her heart tighten, but not weaken. It was time to leave. Not out of fear, but out of love. She whispered, "Goodbye, my home." Then Eleanor turned and walked up the dirt road leading out of the valley. Margaret goes right. Sheriff goes left. Noah in arms. 3 people. 1 child. A family made by choice, not blood. As they left the path, the sound of horse hooves echoed in the distance. "Sheriff, stop right there. Something is wrong." The sound of hooves grew closer. A rider was coming from the east, the direction leading out of town. Margaret took the reins. Eleanor held Noah close to her chest. Sheriff put his hand on his gun. The horseman stopped before them, panting. "Sheriff, they're coming! A group of northerners armed!" Fletcher clenched his jaw. "How much?" 4 or 5. I lost count. Margaret turned to Eleanor. "We must go now." Eleanor nodded. But before they turned away, the rider added, making the air freeze. "They said they were looking for the baby." Eleanor hugged Noah tightly. Her whole body was shaking, but her eyes didn't. Go west. Don't look back," ordered the sheriff. And so they dashed, red dust kicking up behind their hooves through the fading afternoon. But after walking a few hundred steps, Eleanor couldn't help but look back. On the top of the northern slope, silhouettes of people were standing, dark, silent, like a ghost in the late afternoon light. They have arrived, and the journey of 3 people for the baby officially began. The road west led over long hillsides, golden grass rolling in the wind. The last rays of the afternoon sun seemed to touch the backs of the 3 fleeing figures, dyeing them crimson, the color of sunset, the color of determination. Eleanor sat behind the sheriff, holding Noah in her arms. Margaret rode beside her, the wind whipping her cloak, giving her face the determined look of someone who had decided to stand on the side of right, not the side of ease. Sheriff Fletcher kept looking back. "They're following. Not close, but not far." Eleanor held Noah close. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just buried his head in Eleanor's chest as if it were the only home the world had left for him. The wind blew harder. Dust swirled behind her. But through it all, Eleanor remained strangely calm. Maybe because she knew running away to protect Noah was the best choice of all. As darkness fell, the sheriff led them to a small ravine. "This will do," he said, pulling the horses into an area sheltered by the cliffs. Margaret dismounted first, helping Eleanor down. "Are you okay?" "Fine. But Noah needs to rest a bit." Margaret placed her hand on Eleanor's cheek and said softly, "You are braver than any woman I have ever known." Eleanor just smiled, a gentle, faint smile, but one filled with power. The sheriff lit a small fire. Not big. Enough to provide warmth, but not enough to give away his location from a distance. Eleanor wrapped Noah in a wool blanket and held him close, listening to their heartbeats mingling. The wind blew through the canyon, carrying with it the howling of the distant forest. The 3 of them sat close together, like 3 pieces of a newly formed family, but bound by choice, not blood. Margaret looked at the fire and asked softly, "Eleanor, if we escape, what are you going to do next?" Eleanor was silent for a moment. "I will stay somewhere safe. Raise Noah. Let him know that he was born from the love of people who chose to do good, even when it was hard." Then she looked at Margaret. "What about you?" Margaret smiled, a sad but gentle smile like the early spring breeze. "I will stay by your side, as long as I can." Sheriff interrupted, his voice hoarse but warm. "Then the 3 of us will take Noah to another place, another life." Eleanor looked at the 2, her heart softening, but stronger than ever. As the night fell, a noise woke all 3 of them up. The sound of rolling stones, the sound of horses, the sound of footsteps. Sheriff whispered, "They're coming." Margaret gripped the reins tightly. Eleanor held Noah close to her chest like a human shield. Shadows appeared on the cliffs in the distance. No voices, just dark shapes sprawling on the ground, menacing but silent. The sheriff took out his gun and quietly loaded it. "Hold Noah tight." Eleanor nodded. But suddenly, a call rang out in the wind, deep and familiar. "Enough!" "We came to talk, not to fight." Eleanor stopped. It was Marilla's brother's voice. In the night, his tall figure appeared standing in the middle of the northern group, hands raised high. "None of us are allowed to touch this child," he said loudly, his voice echoing down the ravine. "My sister died protecting him. We must not let her death be in vain." Another member of the group growled, "But our rules, our law also says that children are not liabilities," the brother replied, his voice cutting into the darkness. Marilla does not want Noah back. That was her final word. I respect that. There was a murmur of discontent. But then, it all died down under his sharp, sad gaze. The sheriff stood in front of Eleanor and Noah, his voice firm but not provocative. We are not handing over the baby. The brother raised his hands in a gesture of goodwill. I didn't come to get the girl. I came to finish. He looked straight at Eleanor, my sister, saw where she belonged. And you, Eleanor, you are that place. Eleanor choked. Her whole body shook, not from fear, but from the sudden relief. Margaret stood beside her, gently taking Eleanor's hand. The older brother continued, From today on, none of us are allowed to harm Noah. Whoever goes against my words will go against me. Those words were like a final seal that ended the danger that had haunted Eleanor all this time. The people behind gradually retreated, disappearing into the darkness as if they had never existed. Marilla's brother looked at Eleanor one last time. You must raise her well. Let her grow up without fear like us. I promise, Eleanor said through tears. He nodded. Then I'll go. And then he left, his shadow blending into the night forest. No one said anything for a long time. The sheriff relaxed his grip on the gun. Margaret placed her hand on her chest, as if she could finally breathe deeply after so many heavy days. Eleanor hugged Noah, and in that moment she knew. The storm had passed, not by luck, but by everyone's courage. Noah stirred slightly, his tiny hands touching Eleanor's cheeks. As an innocent, thank you. Eleanor cried not from pain, but from the knowledge that she had just entered a new chapter in her life. One, no longer of running away, but of building. The next day, the three rode west, but with different attitudes. No more running away. Stepping into the future. On the last hilltop overlooking Red Valley, Eleanor stopped her horse. She looked out at the valley, the one that had given her a family, a child, and a life she never expected. Margaret stood beside him. Would you like to come back here someday? Eleanor looked at the sunlight spreading over the valley, then looked at Noah in her arms. Yes, she smiled. When Noah is older, when everything is completely calm. I want him to know where it all began. And when you come back, Red Valley will welcome you like family, said the sheriff. Eleanor nodded, her eyes filling with tears. Let's go. To our new home. Margaret asked softly, New house where? Eleanor looked to the horizon, where the hills melted into the pale blue sky, where Noah laughs, where our hearts are without fear, where we choose to be family. The sheriff smiled. Then let's go. Family. And so they went, three adults. One child forming a small, enduring figure across the vast prairies of the West. A family not related by blood, but with the same choices. Same courage. Same faith. Same love to overcome the darkness. And in the golden light of morning, Noah laughed a loud, clear laugh that signaled the rebirth of a life. Eleanor looked at the baby, her heart filled with gratitude. She came to the West to be a wife, but God sent her to a bigger role, to be a mother, to be a safe place for that little heart, and to rebuild her own life. They left Red Valley, but Red Valley will always stay in them. Restaurants of that aid. Eleanor's story reminds us of something simple but powerful. Sometimes life doesn't give us what we expect. It gives us exactly what we need to become stronger. A child we don't know can become family. A woman we seem weak to protect with her life. And wounds that seem never to heal can become the spark for a new journey. No matter how old you are, you still have the right to find hope. You still have the right to find love through the smallest things. You still have the right to overcome your fears, to choose the most beautiful thing for your heart. If life ever hurts you, remember, sometimes silence, perseverance, and kindness are enough to bring you back to a warm place. Thank you for taking the time to follow this story. If you find it meaningful, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue to bring healing journeys just for you.